He used to be a man everyone admired. Sharp suit, charming smile, strong stride. Then came the accident. 1 second of speed, one crash, and everything changed. He was paralyzed from the waist down. I remember the smell of antiseptic, the cold, vinyl of the hospital cot, the rattle in his chest. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my job, my clients, and my comfort to be at his side. I bathed him when he couldn't move, fed him when he couldn't lift a spoon, whispered hope into his ears when even the doctors looked away. I told myself, this is love, but love should never make you feel invisible. One night I bent to clean him after he wet the bed. He couldn't speak much yet, but he whispered a name. A soft breath. Lena. I froze. That wasn't my name. That was hers, his ex, the one who left him long before I ever arrived. I thought maybe I heard it wrong. Maybe he was dreaming. But the next morning, as I adjusted his pillows, he looked at me, really looked, and asked, "Did Lena call?" Just like that. No shame, no hesitation. I said nothing. I couldn't. My mouth went dry. My throat burned. This was the man I'd wiped blood and vomit from. The man whose breathing tube I monitored through the night. The man I told, "You're not alone." And now, the only name in his heart was hers? Not mine, not the one who stayed. I didn't cry. I just nodded. No, she didn't. He sighed, disappointed, and I knew right then, this wasn't love. This was servitude, and I had been the one giving, while he waited to stand, not beside me, but behind someone who'd already walked away. I tried to push it aside. For weeks, I told myself, he's confused. He's vulnerable. Trauma plays tricks on the heart, right? But it kept happening. When the therapist asked him what he looked forward to most, he said, "Maybe reaching out to Lena once I'm better." My fingers clenched. I smiled. I kept feeding him, cleaning him, quietly documenting everything. He didn't know I'd started recording our conversations. Not to shame him, but to protect myself, because something in me had changed. The woman, who once sacrificed everything to hold him up, had just realized she was being used as a crutch to reach someone else. He made progress quickly. Our life became measured in small wins, wiggling toes, holding utensils, lifting himself into the chair. Each time, I clapped, cheered, kissed his forehead. He smiled, but never at me, always past me, toward a vision of a woman who'd ghosted him years ago. He started brushing his own hair again and asked, "Do you think I look like I used to?" I told him, "You look stronger." He frowned. Lena always liked me clean-shaven. It took everything in me not to scream. I realized then, he wasn't recovering for us. He was recovering for her. I stopped speaking as much. Not out of pettiness, but preservation. My words were landing in the wrong heart. I was pouring affection into a vessel already tilted toward someone else. So instead of asking, "How do you feel?" I began asking myself, "What do I want?" I wanted peace, purpose, a life that didn't revolve around proving I was better than a ghost. So I quietly began to take online classes again, things I put on pause for him. I reconnected with old clients through email. When he asked what I was doing, I said, "Just passing time." He nodded, uninterested. I could have told him I was building a life without him, but I wanted the silence to carry its own message. One morning, I heard him laugh through the door, a deep, familiar laugh. It had been months since I'd heard that sound. I rushed in, hopeful. But he wasn't laughing with me. He was laughing at a message. A DM. "She messaged," he said. Lena, she finally wrote back. My heart didn't break. It hardened. What did she say? I asked calmly. She said she was sorry about the accident. She wants to catch up. He smiled. It wasn't just gratitude. It was longing. I nodded. That's great, I said. Then I turned and left the room. That night, I moved my things into the guest bedroom. He didn't notice right away. He was too busy trying to walk unassisted, motivated not by survival but by delusion. Lena wasn't coming to be a caregiver. She was coming to see if he was still desirable. That's what this had become. Not recovery, but a performance for an absent audience. And I was the one who fed him, clothed him, stretched his muscles, and stood behind the curtain while he rehearsed a comeback for someone who didn't earn his fall. It was poetic, in a twisted way. And yet, I didn't hate him. I just stopped seeing him as mine. I visited a lawyer, asked quiet questions. What does divorce look like in this kind of situation? I didn't tell her the whole story. I didn't need to. She looked at me and said, You've been carrying someone else's body and soul. When's the last time someone carried yours? I didn't answer, just cried. Silent tears, the kind that say everything. She handed me paperwork and said, Don't rush, but don't wait for his permission either. Back home, I packed a second bag and left it in the closet. I began saving receipts, logging my hours, separating accounts. He noticed my distance. Are you mad at me? He asked one night. I shook my head. No, I'm finally being honest with myself. He blinked. What does that mean? I smiled gently. It means you're not the only one who's learning how to walk again. When Lena finally visited, I made tea. I greeted her with grace. She hugged him lightly, awkward. He grinned like a schoolboy. I watched her scan the room, looking for something, maybe a glimpse of what she missed. But she looked bored, polite. She asked him about therapy, about progress, then checked her phone. She left an hour later. It was great seeing you, she said, voice hollow. He stood frozen, at the door long after she left, like the dream had collapsed before he could catch it. I walked past him and said, She's not staying, and I'm not waiting. The next morning, he asked if I thought Lena would come back. His voice was soft, unsure, almost childlike. I looked at him across the breakfast table. This man I had once fed with trembling hands, carried through nights of fever, and loved past the limits of exhaustion. No, I said gently. She already got what she needed, reassurance that you're still stuck on her. He flinched. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was finally time to speak plainly. He sat there, stunned, as if I had betrayed him. But I had nothing left to give that wasn't already stolen by his obsession with someone who never came when he was broken. He wanted to feel whole again, but he never saw that he was using me as scaffolding, rebuilding for an audience that had already left the theater. I finished my tea, stood up, and placed my wedding ring on the table. I gave everything I had, I said. You waited for someone who gave you nothing. And with that, I walked to the door, not out of heartbreak, but out of clarity. Didn't slam it. I let it click shut. Final. Painless. Done. I didn't move out in a blaze of glory. I moved with grace. With spreadsheets, with signed documents, with boxes labeled in neat handwriting. I had already been invisible in that house. This time, I made the invisibility work in my favor. He didn't call. He didn't beg. Maybe he still believed Lena would show up now that the space was finally clear. But I knew better. I had glimpsed her eyes during that visit. She wasn't returning to love him. She had come for her own closure. I was just a silhouette in the background, and yet somehow I was the one who left whole. I rented a small apartment on the edge of town, and set up a tiny desk facing the window. I opened my laptop and clicked submit on the caregiving startup I had quietly been building for over a year. It was called Anchor, a place for women who stayed too long, for those who healed others while being emotionally starved. That business didn't just launch, it soared. And as my face started appearing on articles, panels, and testimonials, I realized something beautiful. He had never really left me with nothing. He had left me with myself. Months passed. The divorce was clean. He didn't contest. He even signed a note saying I had sacrificed generously for his recovery. I knew he thought that would make him look noble, but I didn't care about the optics. I cared about the freedom. Anchor grew rapidly. Women flooded our inboxes with stories like mine. Caretakers turned invisible. Partners turned afterthoughts. We offered resources, legal guides, even quiet therapy groups for those afraid to say it out loud. I resent the man I saved. And slowly, the shame began to leave them. That was our mission, to rewrite loyalty, not as quiet suffering, but as active choice. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, calm, centered. I still remembered what he whispered when I washed his hair, what he said when he thought I'd always be there. And now, those memories didn't hurt. They empowered me. Because I was no longer trying to make him love me. I had become a woman even I admired. My first speaking engagement ended with a standing ovation. I didn't cry. I just nodded once, smiled at the crowd, and thought, he stood again. But I'm the one who finally rose. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for Anchor's next grant cycle, I received a message. No subject line, just a name. His. I clicked. It was short. I saw you on the news. You look incredible. I wish I'd seen it then. I'm sorry. No explanations, no begging. Just 7 sentences he must have rewritten 100 times. I didn't reply. Not because I was cruel, but because I no longer needed to. He was still searching for validation in the reflection of a woman he used to overlook. But I wasn't in that mirror anymore. I had left the room. That night I lit a candle. Not to remember, but to release. I burned the last handwritten letter I ever wrote him. It wasn't angry. It simply said, "You healed. So did I. You stood. I soared. Let's not confuse motion with direction ever, again." The paper curled and cracked, and I watched it turn to ash. I finally understood something profound. He had lost me the moment he made me feel like second place to someone who wasn't even there. And I had won the moment I chose to never be compared again. At our final court appearance, he showed up late, looking thinner and older. I sat on my side with a calm I didn't have the first time around. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I wore white, not out of spite, but as a quiet reclaiming of the ceremony I never really got to have. He mumbled when the judge asked if the terms were fair. I spoke clearly. "Yes, Your Honor. I walk away with no regrets." He looked at me, startled by the finality. I didn't flinch. We signed the papers. Outside, he caught up to me. "You look happy," he said. "I am," I replied. "She never came back, you know." I tilted my head. "She didn't need to. She was just your excuse for never loving the woman right in front of you." His face fell. "I didn't mean to—" I interrupted softly. "That's the tragedy. You didn't mean anything. Not enough to stay, not enough to grow, not enough to love the one who stayed." I walked away as he stood on the courthouse steps. He could walk again. Good for him. Now, he'd get to chase ghosts on his own 2 feet. I didn't talk about him in interviews. Not once. Not even when journalists pried or tried to corner me with clever questions. "Was there someone in your past who inspired this work?" "Yes. But not in the way they imagined." I wouldn't immortalize him with attention. I wouldn't let his name live in the same breath as the thing I built. I talked about Anchor, about the women, about the nights I'd lie on the bathroom floor, wondering if I was selfish for wanting to leave, and how, slowly, I learned that self-respect is never selfish. The pain wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was emotional starvation. You can't heal someone who wants to stay broken, and you certainly can't become whole by breaking yourself in half to keep them company in the dark. One night after a speech, a woman in her 60s came up to me with tears in her eyes. I took care of my husband until I collapsed. No one ever thanked me. I hugged her, then let me be the first. That moment did more for me than any apology ever could, because now I wasn't just surviving, I was leading. And my story was no longer about him, it was about her. I had stopped dreaming of him long ago. But one night, months after the divorce, I dreamt of myself, standing at the foot of his hospital bed, watching my younger self spoon soup into his mouth. I stepped closer and whispered to her, "You can leave now." She looked up, startled, tears on her cheeks. "But he needs me." "No," I said. "You needed you, and now you have me." She nodded slowly, placed the spoon down, and walked toward me. We walked out together, hand in hand, past the doctors, past the pitying stares, past the version of love that only gave when it needed. I woke up breathless, peaceful. Dreams don't always bring closure, but that one did. I knew then I'd fully let go, not just of him, but of the woman I used to be when I clung to people who only held me when it was convenient. I made tea that morning in silence, looked out at the city I now called home. I had built all of this from nothing, from the ashes of a love story that was really just a long betrayal, and somehow that betrayal became the blueprint. He tried to call again. Blocked number this time. I didn't answer, but I let it ring, because the sound didn't hurt anymore. It sounded like something far away, like a warning bell in a city I no longer lived in. He left a voicemail. Said he saw the billboard featuring Anchor's next launch. "You're incredible," he said. I always knew it. He didn't, and that was the point. I didn't need his praise. I didn't need him to suddenly realize what he lost, because he hadn't just lost me, he had never truly seen me. And that's what made me invisible in the first place. He loved who I was when I was quiet, selfless, easy to own. He didn't love me when I became someone with a voice. And by the time he looked again, I had already risen too far, too steady, too high to reach with a voicemail and a memory. I didn't delete it. I didn't replay it. I just let it exist, like a ghost, lingering, weightless, powerless. I began mentoring other women, especially caretakers. Women who gave up their careers to stay home. Women who stayed with sick men who recovered and then turned cruel. Women who said, "But I gave him everything." I told them the truth. "That's the problem. You gave everything. You were never meant to give until you disappeared." I watched their faces shift when I said it. That truth hit harder than any lesson. Anchor became more than a platform. It became a sisterhood. We weren't angry ex-wives. We were architects of new lives. Some of us left. Some were left. Some had to wait years for clarity. But we all found one thing in common. We survived people who said they loved us, but only while we were useful. My story wasn't unique anymore, and that gave me strength. Because in the collective healing of women like me, I saw that love wasn't meant to be martyrdom. It was meant to be mutual. And if I had to walk away to learn that, then every step was worth it. One day I passed by the rehab center where I once spent my afternoons lifting his legs, encouraging him through pain, pretending I didn't notice how distant he'd become. It looked smaller now, less like the temple of sacrifice I remembered, and more like a building. I parked, stepped inside, and donated a full year of mobility equipment in Anchor's name. The receptionist asked if I wanted a plaque with my name on it. I smiled. No, let it speak for itself. She nodded, a little confused. But I understood. This wasn't about recognition. This was about reclaiming a space where I once lost so much of myself. I walked past the hallway where I used to sit crying into styrofoam coffee cups. I walked past the chair where I fell asleep in after midnight shifts. And I whispered quietly, I'm not mad at you. I just never needed to lose me to love you. I left a donation envelope with no return address, and I left without looking back. Closure didn't require an audience, just peace. I started getting letters from daughters, not of him, but of women like me. My mom gave up everything for my dad. He left her once he got better. I never knew what she went through until I heard your story. Those messages were like balm to old wounds. They reminded me why I spoke, why I refused to stay silent. Not for revenge, but so the next woman wouldn't feel crazy for choosing herself. Some of those daughters brought their mothers to Anchor events. One woman, 70 years old, held my hand and said, I didn't know we were allowed to leave. I told her, it's not too late. You don't need permission, just a plan. I was no longer just telling my story. I was helping rewrite endings for women who thought theirs had already been written. It was the softest, fiercest kind of power, to be both mirror and map. And every time someone said, you said what I was too scared to admit, I felt like I was repaying every version of me that once believed silence was loyalty. Silence is survival at first, but eventually it becomes surrender. And I had already surrendered too much to ever go back. Lena never came back. Not to him, not to any of it. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had married someone else in another state. Quietly. No ceremony, no announcement. When I saw the one blurry photo online, her in a blue dress, holding hands with a man I didn't recognize, I felt nothing. Just neutrality. I didn't hate her. I didn't envy her. She had been his excuse, not his salvation. A mirage. A placeholder for the dream he never worked for. He built a fantasy out of her memory because he couldn't stand looking at the reality I reflected, his weakness, his failure, his need. But fantasies can't lift your body out of bed, can't wash you, can't sit in hospitals and whisper through feeding tubes. That had been me, not a dream. A woman. One he never truly saw, and now I had become the one thing he couldn't forget. Not because he loved me, but because I had done what he never could. I stayed. I grew. And then, when it was time, I walked away with nothing but dignity and a future he'd never be part of. I didn't remarry right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I was full. Full of healing. Full of rediscovery. I dated casually, kindly, slowly. I built friendships that weren't based on caretaking. I hosted dinners where no one expected me to serve while staying silent. I laughed at jokes I hadn't heard 1,000 times. I danced alone in my kitchen. I woke up without dread. There was a sweetness in those quiet mornings, a clarity in brushing my hair without rushing to hold someone else together. One night, while walking home from a charity gala, I met someone new. Not extraordinary, just kind. He didn't ask about my past. He asked about my goals. He didn't say, "You're amazing." He said, "How can I help?" I cried after our third date, not because he said something beautiful, but because he didn't make me feel like I had to earn his decency. I was just safe. And I realized then, maybe love isn't supposed to save you. Maybe it's just supposed to meet you where you've already saved yourself. Anchor received an international grant. I traveled to speak at a global summit in Geneva. Women from every corner of the world gathered to discuss recovery, betrayal, and self-preservation. My panel was titled The Strength of Leaving. I stood on stage, scanned the faces of survivors, and fighters and silent screamers, and I said, "There is no shame in walking away. There is only shame in staying for people who've proven they will never choose you." The room exhaled. It wasn't clapping that followed. It was stillness. Like truth had cracked open something sacred. Afterward, a young interpreter approached, me with tears in her eyes. "My mother stayed too long. You just helped me understand why she stopped smiling." I hugged her. I didn't say, "I'm sorry." I said, "Tell her she still can." Because that's the heart of every story like mine. It's never too late to begin again. Not at 20, not at 50, not at 70. We don't age out of self-worth. We just grow into the courage to claim it. It was almost poetic when I ran into him again. A fundraiser for spinal recovery programs. I had been invited as a keynote. He had been invited as a patient success story. When I walked on stage, I saw him in the crowd. He looked smaller, older, but I didn't feel power. I felt peace. I told the story, not by name, but by truth. There was a time when I believed loyalty meant staying through everything. Now I know loyalty starts with yourself. The applause that followed wasn't for revenge. It was for rebirth. When I stepped off stage, he approached. "You were always stronger than me," he said. I smiled. "I know." He reached out, like maybe he thought we could share a moment. I didn't take his hand, not out of anger, but because I had already given him enough pieces of me. And now, every one of them had been stitched back together into something far too whole to ever hand over again. After that night, I didn't think about him again. Not really. His story had finally closed in my body. No tension, no trace of unfinished sentences. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony with my legs curled beneath me, listening to the wind. It whispered nothing of him, just peace. I looked around at the life I had built, one decision at a time, 1 inch at a time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every photograph on the wall, every notebook on the desk, every friend who texted, "Did you eat?" when I got busy. This was love. Not the frantic kind, the quiet kind, the kind I gave to others for years, hoping it would be returned. And now, it wrapped around me with no conditions, no tests, no performances. Just truth. When women asked me if I regretted staying, I told them this. No, because staying showed me who he really was, and leaving showed me who I really am. That's the beauty of betrayal. It strips away illusion. I didn't need revenge. I needed return. Return to myself, and I got it. Fully. With interest. With softness. With strength that could no longer be borrowed or broken. I had become unshakable. There were nights I used to beg the universe, "Please, just let him see me." But the universe had bigger plans. It didn't want him to see me. It wanted me to see me. The woman who stayed loyal through devastation, who fed a man while starving her own dreams, who helped someone walk again, only to be left behind the moment he could stand. That woman deserved to be seen, not by him, but by herself. And now, she was, fully, proudly, without apology. I had learned the lesson that women like me are rarely taught, that love isn't measured by how long you endure, but by how well you choose yourself when it counts most. The last message I ever got from him was short. "I hope you're doing well. I think about you sometimes." I didn't delete it. I didn't reply. I just let it sit there. A digital tombstone for a version of me that no longer existed. He thought he was being kind. He didn't know he was writing his own epitaph in my memory. She stayed. He didn't choose her. She left. He remembered her too late. I smiled, closed the app, and went back to my work. Somewhere, another woman was drafting her exit plan. Somewhere, a caretaker was asking herself if it was okay to want more. I wanted to be ready when she found her courage, because now I had enough to give. They say forgiveness is the final step, but that's not always true. Sometimes the final step is indifference, the ability to remember without pain, to tell your story without trembling, to say his name and feel nothing. That was my freedom. Not in forgetting, but in not needing to remember. Not in pretending it never hurt, but in honoring how deeply I healed. That's the true end to every story like mine, not with the man crawling back, but with the woman never looking back. I didn't need him to say sorry. I had already lived the apology. I had already outgrown the wound. And so I kept walking. Through cities and countries and milestones he'd never see. I traveled to places I once only read about, gave speeches in rooms that would have silenced the girl I used to be. I built something that didn't need his permission to shine, that didn't ask, "Am I enough?" because it already knew the answer. I didn't just survive him. I outlived the version of me that would have waited forever for scraps. And I did it not with rage, but with intention. Every moment after him had been mine to define, and I had written it in gold. When Anchor hit its 5th anniversary, we threw a celebration. Survivors, founders, donors, everyone dressed in white. We wrote down the names of the people who once made us feel small and folded them into paper boats, letting them float down a river lit by candles. I watched mine drift away, lighter than I imagined, and I whispered, "Thank you for showing me who not to be." That wasn't bitterness. That was release. That was me, letting the story end without dragging the dead weight forward. I had walked through fire, yes, but I came out dressed in peace, the kind you only earn after losing everything and choosing to rebuild in your own name. I stood by the river, a new man beside me, my hand in his. He never asked for stories I didn't want to tell. He just stood there, present, warm, safe, the kind of partner who doesn't need to be chased or rescued or convinced. And I realized then I had finally stopped needing to be chosen, because I had chosen myself. That little girl inside me, the one who once whispered, "Will anyone ever see me?" was smiling, because I saw her now, every day, in the mirror, in the mission, in the quiet love that asked for nothing but truth. And if he ever tells someone, "She left me," I hope they ask why, and I hope he answers honestly. She healed me when I was broken, and I hated her for not being someone else. Because that's what happened. And I let him go. And then I rose.